Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today we want to return to the subject of SSDs because we did a video about a couple of months ago on the subject of buying second-hand drives from data recovery companies and putting them to the test to see if data could be recovered. And as much as I enjoyed that video, one of the things that came off the back of it were a lot of users were talking about, well, if you're going to go down the road of buying second-hand Samsungs, old PNYs, integral SSDs and more, why don't you go the whole hog and start looking at drives on AliExpress and Alibaba, because there's a lot of cheap drives over there. And you know what? You are right. When you do head over there, it gets to a point where buying second-hand drives like these at 120, 250, 500 and a terabyte, you can get drives mad cheap over there for as little as a tenner per terabyte. But of course there's going to be some of you watching this video shouting at the screen right now, who on earth buys those drives from those Eastern websites? They're moody as hell, and who's falling for that? Who exactly is thinking they are legitimate WD and Seagate drives? And the reality is, no one's falling for it. Everyone knows they're fake, in the same way you buy a handbag from a man on the street that says Gucci and not Gucci. When a user's buying these drives online, they are well aware they are not the real deal, but they are just looking for the odd bit of storage, and for some users, that bit of budget is worth it. Saving a few quid on storage, I really do get it. I can understand that sometimes when you're looking at populating your NAS system, you look at just simple 1 terabyte of storage for SSDs, and they're rocking out the gate at the moment at £81.99 in terms of quid. Now, to put that into perspective, when you go on sites like AliExpress and start looking up NAS 1TB SSD, there's a lot of options out there, and indeed you look at drives like this one, and we can bring up a couple of others, and you see on there a lot of this storage going dirt cheap. Now, I've talked on the channel before about drives coming from these vendors, and although I've not seen a lot of fake drives come through, I've seen a lot of ex-server hard drives come from AliExpress, Alibaba and the like. But it's when we dig down into the SSDs, for example, when we look at this listing here for an 8TB drive, obviously that first listing is for the cable, but when we go to 8 terabytes of storage here, they're confidently stating that you're going to get an 8TB drive for 45 nicker. Now, you may have noticed the slight difference there between the drive we were talking about earlier and that of this one. And of course, where is the WD logo there? That's right, there's no WD on there, and it does open the door to the question, are we dealing with what's effectively an SD card inside an SSD's clothing? And will this drive break, or will this drive even hit close to 10 megabytes per second, let alone 2 to 3 to 4 to 500 megabytes per second? And this is consistently felt all the way through a lot of these budget Eastern websites. So when we did go ahead and buy some drives, we went ahead and bought 2 of these. I bought 2 1TB drives. Rather than, aiming for the moon and going for this 8TB model, I thought I'd play it safe, and I got 2 1TB drives, and we paid £10.97 for each of these drives. And there you go, I got one. There is our fake WD Red SSD. I actually got 2 of them, but we'll come back to the other drive in just a moment. But that's what the original retail packaging looks like, and here is our moody retail packaging. Now, this I got a couple of years ago, so maybe the retail packaging has changed in modern releases, so one could argue the external box probably doesn't need to look identical there, but you can definitely see the similarities already in the way they've laid out that information. Obviously, just like we saw when we were browsing the Ali website there, the word WD is nowhere on this retail packaging at all. And I'll tell you what, in very conspicuous methods. Why is that? Well, for a start, notwithstanding the fact that on the base there is practically every kind of certification for distribution and resale, and I'm willing to bet the company, whoever they are, cannot back these up with real certificates. The really interesting and funny thing about this box is when you look at the text at the bottom, I'm sure it's there on screen, at the bottom there's information there about contacting the manufacturers if you've got any problems, and the reported 3-year warranty. But all they've done is lazily highlight WD in Western Digital and delete it and leave all of the text. So you've got words like blank corporation and contact us on support@blankdc.com. It's such a lazy job, but nonetheless, at the very least, they've tried to emulate the look of the retail packaging there. Now, if we get the drive out and take a good look at this, because it's going to be really interesting to see if anyone was ever going to rely on that fake as F warranty. But the drive itself looks fairly standard. As mentioned earlier on, there's an absolute lack of the letters WD there around the side, and on the back of the drive we've got that big old sticker there on the back that is largely identical to that of a WD drive. And again, hopefully the comparisons will be there on screen of how they look. But interestingly, once again, a kind of a weird kind of, I'm not going to say omission, but an odd case of laziness meets fake smart. On the rear of the drive, it actually lists the WD UK address for support. On the bottom of the drive there, listing UK PO Box 471 Leatherhead KT22. That's WD and Sandisk's operations centre in the UK. Now, this has been sold to me here in the UK. I wonder what someone in the US would have on the back of their drive, and do they go to the trouble of making sure that it lists the local regional support centre, or are they just cloning the UK address on here regardless of wherever the drive in the world is going to? Now, when it comes to the feel of the drive, I'm not going to say it feels any different to the usual drives. Again, I've dealt with a lot of SSDs, loads of them here on the table. These feel largely identical, and the material, as you can see from the lighting, all largely the same. But I will say this really does feel flimsy. It does not take much pressure in order to get this casing off, and indeed you already heard that crack there. I didn't have to put much pressure on that in order to get in there. Now, here is one of the drives opened up. We'll go into a little bit more detail thanks to a Tech Power Up article later on. But when we remove that top panel there, this is what we find inside. Tiny little PCB here at the top. Now, that in itself isn't unusual. I'm not going to flame them for a tiny little PCB. There are plenty of 1TB SATA drives in the market, and thanks to the miniaturization of a lot of the NAND going inside these things and controllers getting more efficient, you know, it doesn't surprise me that the chip inside is relatively small. But I will say, my word, there are not many chips on here. We got two blank ports here on the back. I believe they're 152, and on the front there we have a controller with absolutely zero label on it there, and we have a NAND module there where our 1TB supposedly lives. So let's dig a little bit into that, shall we? Now, thanks to Tech Power Up and their review of the WD Red SA500 1TB, we can actually compare a lot more of those internals of this moody fake SSD here on the right hand side with that of a genuine piece. Here on the left hand side we've got the Tech Power Up board here removed from that external casing, and as you can see between the two of them there's a decent number of differences immediately. Obviously not just the PCB part colour, but on top of that the layer of those individual components. Indeed, even though the Tech Power Up article was a 1TB model, they've still gone to the trouble of separating it into two NAND packages there on board the official WD product there. Also, you may notice two different components, some of which we're going to go through in a moment, but as you can see now looking at the Moody drive, as mentioned, we've only got a single NAND packet, that's 1TB there, and that's a 152 BGA module there. And if we come out and take a look at the next image on that slideshow, we look at the other side of the drive, zoom out there, and as you can see the layout is even more bare. There's absolutely nothing on the rear side of the fake WD drive there. There's another NAND package there, and of course we've got a little bit more information there to do with the firmware and the controller of that drive. So enormous differences between these two drives and their individual layouts there. Now, closing in a little bit more there, and we can go back in, we can take a little look at this controller afforded to this. Now, on the Moody SSD, unsurprisingly, not only is the NAND controller much smaller, but also we've got zero information on it. We've got the standard Marvell controller there on the left-hand side of the screen on the official drive, and it wasn't until we turned it over and learnt more about the PCB that the fake WD drive is on that we learnt it was utilising a different controller there, the RM113. Now, a couple of interesting things about this controller that's on the Moody drive. Notwithstanding, it is a recognised SATA SSD controller. We found out a little bit more information about it. It's a Ray MX, no, me neither, controller there. Talking about some of the breakdown of the components. It's, you know, obviously not going to blow anyone away. We learned more about the NAND interface there. Moving forward, we got a little bit more about the storage configuration, just how many channels it can support at any given time. Even talking a little bit there about some of the traditional factors built into it there. But with regards to DRAM support, almost none. We got a little bit there to do with the configurability, but ultimately not much to go on. And that's kind of the big deal there, because the Moody drive lacks that memory. When we go back and look at that drive overall, all we have on there in terms of components is the controller and the NAND package. Now, focusing a little bit more on that NAND package, and we can compare the two side by side. Unsurprisingly, the NAND package on the WD drive, as WD always uses first-party in-house components, is a Sandisk component there. Whereas we see this unbranded NAND package here, which honestly, I'm really struggling to source and find information about. I've looked on numerous different sources, and when we get this drive inside the test machine, we're going to deep dive a little bit more into SSD-Z. But ultimately, between the layout of those individual NAND components and that SSD controller, there's a lot of degrees of separation here. And of course, let's not overlook the fact that there is only DRAM or memory there on the official drive, whereas the Moody drive has no memory on hand at all, which means sustained performance, I think we can predict, is going to be absolutely dreadful. But before we get over to the test machine and put this drive through its paces, I do want to highlight something about that Ray MX controller inside there, because something I was not aware of while looking into this was Ray MX is a subsidiary of Realtek. The two companies are connected. This is a financial statement for accounts of that company, and if we go in and look up Ray FX, boom, we can find there as the subsidies Ray MX Microelectronics. Now, we don't know for certain whether that controller on board is the Ray MX controller. It could be, like a lot of the things about this drive, that all they've done is repurpose and rebadge and fake it in terms of what the components are. But if they were going to go to the trouble of faking the controller labeling on this drive for a WD drive, surely they would have just put a fake over a label of it being a better controller, not this relatively unknown one. Arguably, that means that this is probably the right controller on there, but also the connections between Realtek, who make a lot of SSD controllers, and that of Ray MX are clearly established there. All that's left to really learn about is that NAND and the performance it can put out, both sustained and more. We could talk more and more about the utilization of the SSD NAND in terms of durability, but I think we don't really have time for that, and I think a lot of us are just going to assume it's not going to be great. So let's head over to the test machine anyway and put this drive through its paces. Right, so we've made our way over to the test machine here. Let's get ourselves crystal disk info here to see if we can pick up this drive. It's been connected via an external SATA adapter there, and there is our 1TB drive there being displayed with next to sod all information. We've got some features, but again, how accurate these are, we're going to have to sort of wait and see there. And, you know, we're going to get the graph up there, maybe take a look at the temperature, see if there's anything to be concerned with there. Not really. That's our OS SSD inside there. So what we should do next, now we've got that running in there, and again we've got FireCuda 120 there as our OS drive as a basis of comparison. The next thing we can boot up is to go into SSD-Z and see if we can dig out further information about our drive with our 1TB. Get that up on there, and frankly, what are we getting there? Almost no information being pulled from this drive internally there. Indeed, we've got a bit of firmware information there, and I'm going to do a quick Google on that in just a moment, and that is the drive with its fake serial number. But apart from that, we're finding out very, very little information throughout the course of this drive. Trim disabled there as well. Smart information we've already looked at previously. We can see the drive's got a bit going on there. And in terms of overall benchmark, we can use SSD-Z to run some benchmark. But before we do any benchmarks, what I would like to do, and we will use other programs for it, I'm just going to very quickly run some data recovery on this drive. So we're not going to update this software. We're just going to run this. And this is just going to do a very quick scan of that drive just to see if there's any redundant, useless information on it. As you can already see, it had seemingly found a dead partition on that external drive. But let's scan it anyway, just to be on the safe side and learn. We're just going to give this maybe 1 minute. We're not going to go too deep. We're not going to go for a deep scan. But I just want to see if there's any data on this drive or it's been pulled out and reused, which would already be something of a crime. But let's fast forward to the completion of at least 1 minute of scan. And pretty much nothing's been found. So why don't we just exit that? I will say I just did a quick check there on the firmware that was listed by the device there, VE1R900F. And honestly, the only place I could find it on was some vague Acer TravelMate information, but that's really it. There was interestingly some references on some pages to a Samsung drive, but very quick searches just showed that they were just pointless Word docs that have been shoved into a forum, ultimately meaning that the drive itself is definitely still moody as hell. Now, coming out of some of that drill through there, why don't we do some of those performance marks? While we're in SSDZ anyway, why don't we run ourselves a test in this software? Let's do a quick benchmark using this software and just see what it says. Obviously, later on, we're going to be looking at performance numbers with other apps. We're going to be looking at Crystal Disk later on there. And you know what? For the hell of it, we're going to run ourselves an Atto disk benchmark as well. But of course, when we do that, we're going to be looking at sustained performance. Now, as you can see, sequential read, so obviously synthetic, is hitting there at 379. Now, at the start of the video, you saw me laying out some old second-hand old SSDs. A lot of those, that is fairly representative of the numbers I would have seen on there. And what we'll do now is I'm going to go through benchmarks with each of these tools, hopefully one that will support the external USB drive, and we'll run some tests on that drive just to see what we can see about it. Now, benchmarking this drive did actually present a small problem that I forgot about, that you can't actually benchmark USB connected drives conventionally a lot of the time, and you get better results when you directly interface with the system itself. So I powered down the machine, removed the drive from a USB, introduced the drive via a direct SATA port, as you can see here on disk management, and then from there rebooted the system. I even went ahead, after finding that drive, and I went ahead and connected an old Samsung 120 gig SSD inside the external USB in order to just get some good benchmarks and information. But Crystal Disk, immediately upon connecting the drive, gave me next to sod all information. Information such as the power on is now no longer visible. On top of that, when I went back into the SSDZ tool there, it still provided some of the information, but it was still somewhat gappy there. So there's the 1 TB. We've got that benchmark, and we've had to revisit that benchmark. But what I want to do real quick is just go ahead and add this drive as a nice simple volume here. We're just going to leave it on the letters, and we're just going to call this one Fake WD. And then from there, it'll start listing this drive in order to perform some further benchmarking of this drive, and also get a little understanding of the sustained performance potential of this drive. But right now, I'll tell you, this is taking longer than I would have liked to list this drive. This is the first time I'm doing this. I could cut from this, but I think I'm going to leave this on screen to give you some idea about how unreliable this drive is being right now, and just another example why these fake SSDs, or at least fake WD SSDs, might not be worth the crappy misspelt paper they are printed on. But nevertheless, the drive is visible, and indeed, if we try to utilize this, we can't unfortunately list another drive because we're still in Disk Manager. And you know what, for the hell of it, why don't we come out of this and give it another shot and just see if it's still going to continue to let us do it here. Let's go back into it. We may use Disk Part to try and flat the drive, but it looks like it's completely hanging Disk Management here. So now let's go into Disk Part and have a cheeky little look at the drive here. We're going to go for List Disk. Have we got ourselves our drive? Let's try. Oh, here we go. Even Disk Part doesn't want to play the game. Let's try that one more time. Make our way in there. List. No, it still doesn't want to play. With none of that working, why don't we just go ahead and try to do that benchmark again using SSDZ. It worked earlier on. Let's see if it's going to work again for us this time. Again, the fact that we've got that black screen there is a particularly bad sign moving forward there. And again, I have tried this on the USB and it worked fine, and I know it's on a working SATA port of my motherboard. So before anyone says, oh, perhaps the SATA board on your mobile isn't working, this is a SATA port we regularly use here at NAS Compares, and therefore I know it works. But for now, seeing no success here whatsoever. And, you know, pretty disappointed with what I'm seeing here overall. And everything is starting to hang because of this poxy drive. Even better, we got ourselves a virtual disk issue. Things are getting better and better. Let's head into the PC panel here. Let's see if it's going to make things hang. We're not in there. Let's go back into the storage, shall we? Let's see if we're getting anywhere, or if it's going to allow that to load up. And finally, we're seeing it. But what are we seeing? No, we're seeing the 120 gig SSD. It looks like our fake WD red drive has completely gone off grid as a virtual drive. So let's go ahead and add that 120 gig SSD just as an example to show you what happens with a normal SSD. So it's going to call this one Samsung. Go ahead, chuck that in, and as you can see, lovely and quick. Yes, it's a 120 gig and not a 1 TB, but that is exactly how quick it's supposed to be. And before I go ahead and action another restart, let's go ahead and go back into disk part there. And now, of course, things are working. And as you can see, there are our drives. There's a USB drive there with no media. You can ignore this too. And we've got our boot drive, and now we've got that Samsung drive there. So why don't I go ahead and do a restart and see if that drive reappears on the system. Okay, so my system's just coming back online now, so no doubt there's going to be plenty of pop-ups here on the bottom right. Let's go back into the PC there. We're not seeing the drive appear. Let's go back into Crystal Disk and see if we've got anything there. And the drive has now reappeared. Again, I've not disconnected it, and now we're seeing that power on count. But already, I have got such little faith in this drive. It is unreal. But at least now, while it's listed, let's have a little look. Are we going to be able to utilize this? No, we aren't, because that's still the Samsung drive, and that's our OS drive there. We still need to see if we are able to add this drive still. So let's go back in to disk management and try to add this drive once again. Let's go for it there. It's listing our drive. We do have the drive activated there, so let's go ahead and create our new simple volume once again. Fake WD and give it another shot. Let's see if it works this time, now that the drive at the very least is visible in Crystal Disk. It looks like we might be getting somewhere. We're actually seeing the format window, but until I know this drive has appeared, I'm not going to take any chances. Go for a refresh there. No sign. I have a sorry feeling we're seeing a repeat of what happened earlier on. While we're doing this, why don't we have another look at disk part? Have a quick sneaky little look. Disk part appears to be... Oh, no, we can make our way in. List disk. And we've got that drive online. So let's select disk 0. And it's allowing us to select that disk there. So at the moment, it's still performing that format. Can that close down? Let's go for that. And now we're going to go for clean that drive. So the drive has now been cleaned. Let's make our way back. Hasn't appeared there. And now, upon a redo, we can see that the drive has now gone in there. I had to clean it with disk part, but now we're able to remount it, and it's seemingly working. There is our drive finally there. And if we open up Crystal Disk one last wonderful time, as I double check that we are still screen recording, and now we can select our drive. Let's select it. It's the E drive there. Let's get ourselves some benchmarks. Let's go for a nice conservative 1 GB test file there. Again, normally when I do performance numbers here on the channel with any SSD or hard drive, I wouldn't ordinarily leave OBS running because that can undermine the results. But at this point, I think it's worthy to at least show what happens with this drive. So at the moment, that is not the performance number I want to see. That is absolute dog mess. 15 meg for that drive. I think we can all go home and say this was a waste of time. Again, while it's doing that, why don't we find out a bit more information about what we've got. We formatted it to NTFS. So this hasn't been an error where we've formatted it to some USB FAT32 limitation, perhaps. As you can see, we're utilizing and creating 1 gig of data, so it's at the very least creating it. But those are some incredibly horrendous numbers that we're seeing there for the most part. If this was an SD card, fine. The right number is surprisingly high, considering I think this does at least earn a retest, I would say, just in case it was some kind of read access error. So I think for now, let's stop that test and perform a retest. So let's go for that one there and see if this is an issue with regarding the interface between how the drive is being interfaced with and whether that controller fell over. But at the moment, we're still seeing that rather appalling performance. If we see another horrendous number in the teens here in the read, which we have, what I'm going to do now is fast forward to some further completion of tests on this drive. Actually, just before I do that, just to give you a little basis of comparison, if we select the exact same test, this time for the Samsung SSD, that 120 gig SSD, so again, that's a 120 gig SATA SSD, we're seeing 453. perfectly respectable. This is a SATA SSD. This is just to eliminate that the performance numbers you're seeing there are nothing to do with the rig, nothing to do with the SATA controller. Let's stop that, and what I'll do is, as I say, I'll go through and run some different tests here on this drive and bring you back. For you, it will be mere moments. For me, maybe about 15-20 minutes. Okay, well, I'm back sooner than I anticipated. Rather than let these tests finish, I think right now I've got enough to show you to tell you just why this drive is a terrible idea. The original crystal disk mask testing here at the top, not only did it gutterball a lot of the read performance there, but not only did the write performance be, more than half of what the reports on the outside of the quote-unquote retail packet said, but on top of that, the test actually aborted before it could complete the mixed 70/30 read and write testing there, as you can see at the top of the screen. Now, with Atto Disk Benchmark here, we could see once again consistent write performance in just about 200 megabytes per second, but the read performance was atrocious all the way along, and we're not even going to talk about some of those IOPS numbers. Finally, we can talk about the AS SSD test that got not even a quarter of the way before completely IO erroring all the way through. Now, to give that a bit of perspective, I also went ahead and retested that Samsung inside there, the Samsung 850. Remember, that 850 was an 850 EVO SSD. This was released right the way back on the 8th of December 2014. If you look at the clock at the bottom right, we are talking a decade-old SSD here. So that decade-old SSD was still cranking out 450 over 413 megabytes per second sequential read over write there. And that was a second-hand drive we picked up for £9. If we wanted a 1TB model of that drive, we probably would have had to spend upwards of 25 to 30. And remember, this piece of sugar here cost us 10 quid, and all that we're seeing right now is nothing but problems. Now, while we go through the last here, what we're going to do is run there in the background, AJA here in the background, and immediately we're already seeing a disk test failure. Fabulous. Let's kill off that AS SSD performance there. The same goes, let's kill off the crystal disk connection. Let's go into crystal disk mark here. We even opened up earlier on the temperature here. As you can see, temperature sensors were non-existent on that drive for the 1TB fake SSD. It didn't get any reading, whereas we saw the Samsung there giving it that reported performance number all the way through the crystal disk, just like we would expect. If we look at now AJA, let's reopen that for AJA here. Make sure it's selecting that WD drive. We're going to go ahead with a nice small 256 meg, and once again give it another try. But no, we've got no DRAM on this drive. We've got no hope of using this drive. We've got no performance on this drive. We've got no stability on this drive. What we don't have here is an SSD. If this video isn't enough to convince you to not buy moody SSDs like this one, I don't know what to tell you. Frankly, an SSD like this that is covered in, let's just say, questionable support practices and at most legally challengeable replication of copyright materials, if that's not enough, then surely the performance numbers with write numbers that barely got out of the teens in megabytes per second and write numbers that on a good day when the weather is going your way, not even 200 megabytes per second. On top of that, it bricked half of the applications we ran with it. Half the information couldn't be crawled and accessed from the drive. The performance numbers we saw on the SSD when it was connected via the USB drive never happened again. That 379 megs we saw this drive spit out on SSDZ never happened again, and ultimately I would argue was a fluke. If you take anything from today's video, if you simply must cut corners on your storage for Billy Basic devices, this is not the way to do it. If you have to cut corners to get to the top of the mountain, go for second-hand SSDs. They're still going to have a bunch of usage on them. The durability is probably going to be questionable, and the power on that can affect these is also a matter for debate. But at the very least, a second-hand branded drive has that certification of quality and production, hopefully, that will set it so far apart from this piece of crap that hopefully it will do the job that might better. But of course, I would always recommend going for, definitely in the case of SSDs, brand new fresh drives with a decent support and warranty behind them and some published terabytes written and drive writes per day figures, because durability on SSDs is king. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, let me know in the comments. We've got a few other tests like this coming up soon. I'm going to play a little bit close to my chest. But for now, take my word for it when I say that this isn't the last time we're going to be talking about moody drives like this. Thank you so much for watching. Click like and subscribe if you did enjoy watching this. If you want to learn more, follow the channel. There's a notification bell. Give it a press. But apart from that, if you need further support, there's a free advice section on NAS Compares. There are guides linked below to other SSDs that we recommend in SSD buyers guides from Seagate, WD and more. And use our Discord, our free community support forum, Ask.NAS Compares, or you can hire me and Eddie here at NAS Compares. It's just us to help you with your needs, either directly via Ko-Fi, Patreon, or via Zoom consultation. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.